I'm going to talk about three real quick things. First one is tell you a story. So very quickly, my name is Dan Fishman, former executive director of the Libertarian Party and currently executive director of a group called People for Liberty. I ran for auditor in Massachusetts in 2018. I was endorsed by every major paper in the state, including the Boston Globe. First time they'd ever endorsed a Libertarian. That meant 4.5% of the polls. And it's because we have a problem with reaching people. And the reason why we have a problem with reaching them is that most people have been programmed not to hear what we have to say. So I had the good fortune to go to school in England for a year, and I took a class which was the history of World War II, taught by one professor from each of the Allied countries. Now, having grown up in the United States, I knew the American story of World War II. The British version of World War II was how Roosevelt was essentially incapacitated by polio, and Churchill stopped him from giving away all of Western Europe to the Russians. The Russian story of World War II is how the Americans and the British wanted the Germans to kill us, but they didn't, so instead they decided they would ally with us. And the French version of World War II is how we cunningly pretended to surrender to the Germans so we could sabotage them from behind their own lines. And that's really what they teach. That's really what they believe. The victors write the history. And it's an important thing to know that when we talk about elections and how people are being affected by elections, the only winners that they've ever seen are Republicans and Democrats, and they're the ones who are telling those stories. Another great class that I got to take while I was there was the history of the French Revolution, taught only with primary documents. So all we did was read the newspapers from France in 1789. It was four primary journals that were out. There was the Royalist paper, the clerical paper, the church's paper, there was a tradesman's article, and then there was the people's paper. And so on Bastille Day, on June 14th, the people's paper, glorious revolution, Bastille stormed, prisoners released. Tradesman's paper, terrible blockade of traffic at the Bastille Square, fish rots on carts. The clerical paper, hundreds of people injured in rioting, church provides aid and succor. And the Royalist paper, today the king went falconing. This is 1789, this is roughly 250 years ago. And people then have a biased media. When we go out and try to bring a message of liberty out to the people right now, we are dealing with this incredible bias that's been set at a table by the Republicans and the Democrats. But part of the reason that we're failing is that the message that we are trying to bring people is political. And in fact, the end goal of libertarianism is the end of the political structure as we know it, right? We don't actually want to win elections and rule. We want to have a government that is so depowered that we don't care about who wins the office, that taking the office will actually be an act of public service. And so the way that we get that is to look at the people that we're talking about and try to get them to separate the political issues from what we actually want. There's a phrase that I learned early on. I like Spike. I grew up Jewish, didn't take particularly well, but I remember learning that one of my favorite poets, E. Cummings, did broadcasts for the Nazi Party. And I had to resolve that. Here's this poet that I really like, and he wrote these amazing things, but said some pretty terrible things. And I realized you have to be able to separate the art from the artist. And that has served me very well over the years. I'm not going to list the musicians whose lyrics, I can occasionally say, I wish he hadn't said that, or the publicans they've said, but I really love their music. Other artists are like that. And we have to be able to separate the politician from the politics. So you will probably hear me at some point in time complain about some liberty Republicans, right? I've had my bone to pick with Rand Paul over certain issues, and there's certainly things that I don't agree with Thomas Massey on, even Justice Amash. But if I separate the politics from the politician, I can find a lot of issues that I do agree with them on. Instead of separating all these when I start separating all these things, I get to unite the people around an element of liberty. And so, how many people came to the liberty movement through the the fact that there was one issue that interested you in the beginning, and that's what brought you in, and you learned more about it. That's almost everybody. Now, how many people believe that most people out there who aren't in this room have one liberty issue that's in their back burner? Of course. We can connect these things. I have solved the problem, I'm ending my talk. We know that that's what's involved in it. The change that we want to see is not political, it is cultural. It is the idea that we can respect each other's belief system. And we have the best model for that because we live it. Here in the United States, there is religious freedom like nowhere else. Catholics, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslim, Zoroastrians. Yeah, thank you. All these religions that live together in relative harmony. And the idea that we would have an election, and if the Baptists won, for the next 4 years, we would all live as Baptists, that's insane. How can we possibly have that idea? How can we apply that to our politics? And so what we have to do is get to people to talk about the things that appeal to them that aren't actually politics. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of stuff that we're talking about shouldn't be politics. Vaccinations, that should not be a political issue. Okay? And if we talk to people about the ideas, like, is that really where we want the government to be? I can't remember who it was, one of the earlier speakers, might be you, Spike, talking about our bodies, our choices, and all the people who've advocated that and saying, this is not a political decision. We should be jumping on that. We should be finding an ally in that movement who will say, my body, my choice is actually an absolute. I don't believe that it's a situation where government gets to change what they want. There are other issues like that where we talk about what we're doing, and I'm just going to go back to my slides for a second so I can remember what I said. Where we can be talking about the things that have changed in our lives that we've seen that have made ourselves significantly different from what we used to be as a culture. Anybody here old enough to remember when we used to say in America, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it? Yeah, of course, we all remember that. Can you imagine any political person saying that now? Of course not. Now, we live in this area that any comment is considered dangerous if it threatens the body politic. We have to get back to that idea of the American culture, which is different from the American body politic. We have a system where we have the memory still in our society for a little while, because I saw 10 people nod along with that. But I have said that to younger people, and they're like, I've never heard it. I have never heard anybody say that. And the reason why we're here now, why I'm here now, is because I really do believe, I think of the great words in the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln talks about, on this continent, a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that we are all created equal. And at the end, he talks about dedicated to the idea that these concepts shall not vanish from the earth. If we don't do it, they will. We are the last stand of this place. If we are the last stand of the idea of true freedom, and it's getting corrupted. And I appreciate you guys being here. At the end of the day, it's a long day. That's the dedication that it's going to take. We have to be the ones who stand up and get this stuff done. I rarely quote the US government, but they've got this one little thing in the Postman's Creed. I will not flag or fail. We can't do that. We have to find a way to say, this liberty issue, this liberty culture, every government in the world is actually working against it. They want us to take it back to the idea of an authoritarian system. Prior to the American Revolution, Britain was the freest country in the world. When the Americans revolted, they're like, you know what? We don't want to be freest. We want to be free. There's not a qualification upon that. And so when we go out and we talk about campaigns, we talk about supporting the message, we talk about all these things, the best thing that we can do is to be focused on the cultural battle. The one that we can win by living free lives, by showing people what we do with our freedom, by making it so that when people say, you know what, only the government can do that. I have this great slide 10% Democrats, 10% Republicans, 15% roads, and 45% other libertarians. When we look at that sort of thing, and we see the fighting inside of it, we realize that we have this intense competition, which is crazy because culturally, we actually are completely united. You can go to almost any libertarian and say, you know, where are you on guns? Where are you on drugs? Where are you on borders? And we tend to agree with all of these things. And we use that to fight amongst ourselves, and then the smallest point, and then we use it to exclude people who want to be our allies because they don't agree with the other 7 points. So part of what I'm doing, People for Liberty, is that we said there has to be a larger group, a group that goes out and finds the people who have one liberty issue. Give them a home. Give them a place where we can give them more liberty issues like that. School choice is huge right now. So we have now, combined, we have a bunch of different groups on Facebook, on the web, we're launching a portal, about 400,000 people that we're regularly messaging. But we're not messaging them with everything. We know what their issue is. And so if you're school choice, we're talking about, you know, the articles in Fee Carrie McDonald writes about school choice. If you're talking about Cuba right now, you're a fan of Libertarios, Hispanos, any of these issues, we're giving you the messages that you want to hear. Because we know if we give you the liberty message long enough, the light dawns. And I can't say, you know what? I only support liberty here, but I don't support liberty there. Because we all reach that conclusion. We have become more libertarian over time. It always happens. I'm going to close with a story of how a lot of people are programmed against liberty, and even I've been a libertarian for a long time, just recently radically changed one of my views. So when I ran for Congress in 2012, I ran against John Tierney and Richard Desai. Richard Desai was a Republican. Massachusetts hasn't elected a Republican to federal office since 1994, not counting the special election with Scott Brown. And Richard Desai was a Massachusetts Republican. Out, married, gay man, pro-choice. The Democrat was pro-life. His wife had gone to jail for 30 days for money laundering, and he had sponsored bills to exonerate her money laundering. That's just, you know, Massachusetts politics. When we got into that election, and I started talking about liberty issues, so many people said, I would like to vote for you. I would like to vote for you because you represent what I actually believe, because all these things that you were talking about, I agree with. But they couldn't, because our voting system is based on fear. At one point in time, Americans, Calvin Coolidge said, the business of America is business. Exactly right. And we're great at business, right? We are, you know, people around the world hate America for a million different reasons, but if they're going to go into business, they want to go into business with an American because we're awesome at it. We learn the process. And about 80 years ago, Americans started applying their business processes to politics. And they got really good at it. And about 40 years ago, they came to the conclusion that instead of running a new positive campaign for each candidate that comes down the path, we can continue running the same negative campaign against the other party. And you know, the best example of it was, I think 2000, George Bush ran this campaign against Al Gore that essentially said, if you voted Democrat, the milk in your refrigerator was going to spoil, your long distance company was going to be changed to Sprint, and I only make that when I see an older audience like mine. Kids don't even know what long distance is anymore. But all of those options that came along. And now we have this one opportunity in front of us. Larry talked about it at the beginning, and I'm hoping it sort of bookends everything at the end. Ranked choice voting is out there. And it is not perfect, but it is the best solution that's out there. And one of the best examples of that was we saw in Maine, there was a Republican running named Bruce Poliquin, a Democrat, David Golden, a Libertarian, and an Independent. And at the end of the first round of voting, Poliquin had 45%, Golden had 42%, Libertarian had 6%, the Independent had 1%. In a normal election, Poliquin would have won. However, Poliquin was very strongly a drug warrior, did not think marijuana should be legalized. which made him be pushed around. That's a crazy place to be in 2016 anyway, but that's where he was. And so, when they eliminated the Libertarian, who do you think the Libertarians picked for their second choice? Not the guy who's anti-drugs. And so the Democrat ended up winning, but the Libertarians didn't feel like they had to throw away their vote. They were able to see that there was actually 6% of vote for the Libertarians in there. So the last thing I want to do, and I'll wrap it up, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to show you everything, but there is a lot of stuff that we can do. Separate the art from the artist, separate the politics from the politician, unite the people around our principles, then ranked choice voting. That's what I got. Thanks, guys. On Veterans Day, we're doing a broadcast, a Veterans Law broadcast. You can go to the People for Liberty website or our Facebook page. You're on at 8 o'clock at night, and we'll talk liberty and veterans issues. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Dan. Dan didn't even get the benefit of one of my pithy introductions. So I appreciate that. This concludes our broadcast day. We've got a fundraiser tonight over at the rail line at 8 p.m., which you'll find an advertising for in your program. It's not too late to register. If you go to lpny.org, you can certainly register for that fundraiser. Hope to see many of you there. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow morning for the really exciting part of this meeting, the Robert's Rules of Order and strict business. Thank you.